Thank you everybody for being here for our first seminar of the season. My name is Christy Coe. I'm the Executive Director for the Stanford Digital Economy Lab, and welcome to the first lunch seminar of the fall quarter. Today's speaker is Christina Langer. She will start the seminar in just a minute. So Christina Langer is a PhD student at the Catholic University of Eichstätt, Ingolstadt, and a guest researcher at the IFO Institute in Germany. She is also an associate at the Growth Lab at Harvard University and is a visiting research fellow at the Project on Workforce, also based at Harvard. This year, she's also joining the Stanford Digital Economy Lab as a graduate research affiliate, and her research interests cover the fields of empirical labor economics and the economics of education. So we welcome and encourage questions during the seminar. If you're in the Zoom audience, please submit your questions using the Q&A function in Zoom. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll have a Q&A session towards the end of the talk. For those of you who are here in the room at Stanford, please raise your hand. And when I call on you to ask your question, please speak up, because we're going to be using this microphone in the corner. And I may have to repeat your questions as well, just so we can make sure the virtual audience can hear all of you. And with that, I will just say, Christina, welcome. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much for the kind introduction, Christy. I'm really happy and excited to be here and to present my paper, The Value of Skills, New Evidence from Apprenticeship Plans today. This paper is joint work with Simon Wiederhold, and we really appreciate all kinds of comments and feedback that help us to improve the project. So what is the motivation for this project? We all know that an individual's human capital is essential for his or her labor market success, both in terms of wages and also in terms of employment prospects. However, in general, we have a really hard time to measure these skills in a detailed and objective way, especially the skills that individuals have around labor market entry, so individuals' early career skills. And these skills are especially important to understand workers' later occupational choices, but also their career patterns, so how well they do on the labor market, and also how susceptible workers are to technological change. So in general, we can say there is this lack of suitable data on worker skills that are also actually relevant on the labor market. Right now, the literature often uses measures like school attainment measures, like years of schooling, or also skill assessment tests for adults. And while generally interesting, they are only a very crude approximation of an individual's skills that are actually also relevant on the labor market. These skills have a number of potential drawbacks, so these skill assessment tests. So for example, they often reflect subject-specific ability rather than the skills that are actually relevant and required on the job. And the skill assessment tests, they also often cover a rather limited set of skills. For example, numeracy skills get tested, or literacy skills get tested, ICT skills get tested, but there are a lot more skills that might determine the labor market outcomes of workers. These skill assessment tests, they also often rely on small data sets, a very small number of specialized data sets, and also the students that are tested are seldom followed from school into the labor market to also track their later outcomes in life. There's also this literature that uses task surveys. So for the US, you might all be familiar with the ONET data, and we have a German equivalent, which is called Berufernet, but these task surveys often only provide occupational level averages. And this is where we actually step in with this paper. What we do is we use new and innovative data, text data from standardized apprenticeship plans in Germany to construct our really relevant, objective, and detailed measures of worker skills in Germany. So we actually make use of this unique German setting, which is highly standardized. So we can say that someone who has done an apprenticeship in the north of Germany has actually acquired the same skills as someone who has done the same apprenticeship in the south. And this makes it easier for us to infer the skills. For example, if you compare it to university curricula, every university has his or her own, has its own curriculum. And so here we can really assume that everyone in Germany who has done a specific apprenticeship has learned the same skills. What's also really novel about our paper is that we do not only take the extensive margin, meaning this skill has been learned, yes or no. We can also say something about the intensive margin, because these plans usually state the exact number of weeks that a specific skill is taught. So this really gives us an intuitive measure, because, for example, if you take skill assessment tests, these test scores usually vary, so you standardize them to make to make them comparable, and then you have this interpretation of one standard deviation of skills equals or translates to this increase in wages. And we can say if someone has learned one additional month of, for example, cognitive skills, this is related to X% higher wages later in life. Concerning the empirical approach, to be able to do that, we of course have to link it to administrative outcome data, where we can actually observe workers' wages at labor market entry, but also later in life. So here we link it to German admin data to investigate these returns to skills over workers' careers. So we can actually follow them over 4 decades, from 1975 until 2017. We're of course also worried about selection into apprenticeships. And since we do not use any quasi-experimental variation in this paper, we try to do a lot of robustness checks to make sure that we control for the most daunting confounds. For this purpose, we also leverage complementary survey data to be able to control even more rigorously for selection into apprenticeships. Yes?
That's a question.
Of course.
What's the specific selection concern that you have?
So for example, one can say we estimate the returns to skills, but it's not really that you have learned more digital skills that you earn more, but these people select that are more able select into these apprenticeships, and this is why they earn more. So it's this ability concern.
So you're talking about the weeks of work. So for the same apprenticeship across space, there's no variation in terms of how long somebody will stay in the apprenticeship?
Yeah, so the length is also standardized. So each apprenticeship occupation usually takes 3 years to complete, but we also have apprenticeships that take 2 years, some take 3.5, 4, but most of them take 3 years. And I will say more about the institutional setting in just a minute. Just to give you a short preview of our results, so we can actually say that the skills that are developed through the German apprenticeship system are highly valued on the labor market. We find that cognitive and social skills supplied through apprenticeship training are highly valued in the short and also in the longer run. So immediately after labor market entry, but also 20 years after labor market entry. For digital skills, we observe a different pattern. These only pay off later in life. So we also investigate mechanisms that might drive these results. However, workers that have more social or digital intense apprenticeships experience faster wage growth later in life. In terms of magnitude, so 20 years after apprenticeship completion, 1 additional month of cognitive skills is associated with a 0.8% higher wages. And just to have a benchmark, we also estimate a Mincer regression on the returns to schooling. So 1 additional year of schooling in our sample would correspond to 7.2% higher wages. So 0.8% higher wages for only 1 month, not 1 year, would correspond to 1/10 of this size. And for social skills, they are related to 1.1% higher wages, digital skills to 1.5% higher wages later in life, and 1.5% would equal 1/5 compared to 1 year, 1 additional year of schooling. In terms of mechanisms that might drive these results, we also investigate educational upgrading or human capital investments, meaning do these individuals that go through more digital intense apprenticeships also go to university more often later in life, or do they invest more in on-the-job training? There's also this channel, do they tend to switch occupations more often, or do they actually stay in their occupation more often if they have learned specific skills? So I will tell you more about that too. We also leverage the panel dimension of our data. So we document trends in the labor market returns to cognitive, social, and digital skills between 1975 until 2017. And we do so in 2 different ways. First, we follow cohorts over time to see whether the returns differ across cohorts. And we also estimate our wage regression by year to also say something about the time dimension. Yeah, so since this is an international audience, I want to take some time to talk about the institutional setting of the German apprenticeship system and also what makes it so unique and suited for this type of skill analysis, and also to derive objective skill measures. First, one can say that in Germany, almost 60% of German workers have completed apprenticeship training. So we derive skill measures for a very relevant part of the German workforce. It's really common in Germany to go through apprenticeship training. And these apprenticeships, so each apprenticeship occupation, each apprenticeship plan corresponds to one specific apprenticeship occupation. And each apprenticeship occupation has its standardized apprenticeship plan in which the requirements of apprenticeship training are stated. And these requirements are standardized across the whole country by the so-called Vocational Training Act. So we have specific chambers that actually observe that firms really stick to what's in those plans. So one could say maybe firms do only teach firm-specific skills, but that cannot happen because we have these uniform examination formalities. So each apprentice in a specific apprenticeship has to write the same exam on the same day. So if firms would only teach what firm-specific skills, their apprentices would not be able to pass the standardized exam. And you might also be concerned about the fact that, okay, they do what's in those plans, but maybe they do a lot of stuff in addition. But we actually also had some talks with the Federal Institute for Vocational Training, which is responsible for these plans and for vocational training in Germany, and also with some other institutions. And they told us that these plans are already really extensive. So firms usually only manage to get through what's in those plans, so they are not really able to do anything in addition, which gives us more confidence when constructing our skill measures. Yeah, and this highly standardized setting actually provides an opportunity for us to identify the actual skills of a large part of the labor force. And since it's common that individuals actually do an apprenticeship immediately after school, these individuals are quite young, and this gives us the opportunity to say something about how workers' early career skills actually pay off later in life. So how do we construct our apprenticeship skill measures? These apprenticeship plans are text data, and the plans contain the skills that apprentices are required to learn within their apprenticeship. And what we have done, so in general in Germany, there are over 300 apprenticeships, so there's also, it's not only for one specific occupational group like manufacturing, there's really a great variety of occupations that are covered by this Vocational Training Act. And we have actually coded plans for the 165 largest apprenticeship occupations with which we cover over 80% of the German workforce with an apprenticeship. And there are also some apprenticeships that only have a very small number of apprentices, so we couldn't really match them to our outcome data, and this is why we have only coded the largest plans with which we can actually cover most of the German workforce with apprenticeship training. And as I already told you, each apprenticeship plan corresponds to one specific occupation and also states the occupational skill content with a detailed depiction of skills provided at all stages of the apprenticeship. And each plan usually is on average 7 pages long and has on average 120 skills that are listed in these plans. We can also observe the exact number of weeks that a specific skill is supposed to be taught. So this gives us this really nice intensive margin of skill intensity. In total, we have classified over 20,000 different skills. How have we done that? So this is actually a short part of a German apprenticeship plan. And you can see the column number 3 and column number 4, which are of interest for us in this analysis. We have translated the plan to English so that you're also able to understand something. And in column number 3, you can see these bullet points from A to F. And each bullet point in our setting corresponds to a specific skill. So for example, if you take a look at bullet point C, analyze process flows would be labeled as a cognitive skill in our setting. So we have gone through all of these bullet points and we have assigned skill labels to them. And then we make use of column number 4. As I already told you, apprenticeships usually take 3 years to complete. So here the first half of the apprenticeship would be month 1 to 15, and the second half would be month 16 to 36. And these 2 columns would actually give us a proxy for the difficulty level of each skill, because more general skills are usually taught in the first half, and more difficult ones and focus groups are taught in the second half. But we do not make use of this information so far. We only use the number of weeks. So here you can see this number 16, which means that these 6 skills are supposed to be taught for 16 weeks. And what we do is we just assume equal weight. So we divide the 16 by 6 because we have 16 bullet points. And this is how we arrive at our skill measure in weeks. And then we divide everything by 4.3 to have a measure in months. Yeah, because it would be really hard to work with 20,000 different skills. We aggregate them to skill groups. And for this purpose, we make use of a skill classification that is already established in the literature, namely the one by Deming and Kahn in a 2018 paper. They're using job ad data for professionals. So we had to slightly adapt their classification to make it fit to the German apprenticeship context, since this is rather low and middle wage context, so not a high skilled professional context. Yeah.
One clarifying question. I think you covered this on your slide, but Matt Bean is asking what percentage of the German workforce does not have apprenticeships?
Yeah.
Was that 20% or?
I mean, so 60% of German workers have an apprenticeship training, so this leaves us with 40% who do not have that. Great. Yeah. Yeah, so we aggregate our skill measures into 6 different skill groups, namely cognitive, social, digital, manual, management, and admin skills. And examples for cognitive skills would, for example, be math and statistics, critical and analytical thinking, problem solving. For social, we code teamwork, communication, but also customer service and service orientation. And for digital skills, we also use these basic computer skills, but also data security and software skills. Compared to the classification by Deming and Kahn, we had to slightly adapt it because in our setting, manual skills are really important because we also have a lot of crafts apprenticeships. That's of course not that relevant in a professional context. And we also condensed the several management categories into only one, since this only constitutes a minor part, if any, in German apprenticeship occupations. So as I told you, these apprenticeship occupations, they're not only limited to specific occupational groups. There's a diverse range of occupations. So cognitive intense apprenticeships would, for instance, be physical laboratory technician, tax assistant, or technical product designer. So these exhibit the highest share in cognitive weeks of cognitive skills learned. For social skills, we have bank clerks, hotel industry clerks, but also hairdressers. And examples for digital skills would be geomatics engineer or IT management assistant. Just to show you some descriptive statistics of the data, most apprenticeships, so the length in months, they mostly take 2 to 4 years to complete, but the mean is 3 years. So most of them take 3 years to complete. And there is some variation. If you only have a 2-year apprenticeship, of course, you also have a lower number of skills that are listed in those plans. However, if you have like longer apprenticeships, you do not have a cap in the number of skills, because this would also be a concern that skills are not listed due to space constraints, but there's no such thing as space constraints. These apprenticeship plans also get updated from time to time. And in this version of the paper, we only make use of the most current version of a plan. But we have also coded the previous plan for about 1/2 of our sample to make sure that the skills that we're using, that they're also a good proxy of the skills that are in the previous plans. So the correlations of the skills in the previous plans and in the new plans are quite high. Then in terms of the skill content in months, we show the correlations here at the occupation level. So for our 165 plans that we can later merge to outcome data. And the lower part of the table are the same descriptive statistics, but for our estimation sample later. And you can see that in general, apprenticeships are quite cognitive heavy. You also have a high mean for manual skills, followed by admin skills, social skills, and digital skills. And these numbers, these descriptive statistics, look quite similar if we compare our occupational level averages and the individual level averages. Here are some bivariate correlations. So how are these skills actually correlated with each other? We can see that cognitive skills and digital skills are positively correlated. Also digital skills and social skills are positively correlated. And our manual skills are negatively correlated to all of the three skill groups that we're taking a look at. And we actually only focus on cognitive, social, and digital skills later in the paper because they are deemed essential for productivity and economic growth in the literature. There's also within apprenticeship fields, so at the 1 or 2 or even 3 digit occupational level, a really big variance or variation when it comes to the range of skills. So for example, here you can see bank clerks, and here you can see freight and logistics clerks, and they exhibit a similar level in cognitive skills, but the range of social skills really differs a lot, and they're in the same 3 or 4 digit occupational group. And here, when we take a look at cognitive and digital skills, we can also see an electronics technician for ICT and an electronics technician for energy, which also belong to the same bigger occupational group. They again have a similar number of cognitive skills, but really differ in the range of digital skills that are imparted in the apprenticeship. And here for digital and social skills, an e-commerce salesperson or a technical product designer exhibit a similar number of digital skills, but e-commerce salespersons, they learn way more social skills during their apprenticeship. Yeah.
May I ask a question? So did you quantify the data by yourself?
Yeah.
And they are like sentences, and did you just count the keywords, and how did you quantify the data to the statistical data?
So what we have done is we went through these plans and we assigned skill labels to each bullet points on the plans, and then we calculated these skill intensities. And so we have these skill intensities at the 5-digit occupation level, and then we merge it to our outcome data later also at the 5-digit occupational level.
And did you count the frequency of their occurrence?
We also tried a topic model, which is not part of this presentation anymore because we wanted to get a more detailed view of the plans, but we might show it as some sort of a robustness check. So would you be interested in seeing that too?
Yes, maybe later.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so now that I told you how we have constructed our skill measures, we also put some effort into validating our measures. And we did several things. So for example, we checked correlations with existing occupations. Do a similar exercise for Berufinet, so the German equivalent of ONET, where they actually classified it in manual and so on. And we just check our correlations with their measures at the 3-digit level. So they're only available at the 3-digit level. And our measures show the correlations that one would expect with those measures, which is reassuring. Data from PIAC. And here we have test scores for numeracy skills, literacy skills, and ICT skills, so information and communication technology skills. And what we see is that social skills and cognitive skills are positively correlated with higher numeracy and literacy test scores later in life, but only our digital skill measure is also related to higher ICT skills in these skill assessment tests, which is also reassuring. I want to go into a little more detail with the last validation exercise, because you might wonder how predictive are individuals' early career skills, so the apprenticeship skills, actually, when we estimate the returns over time. So what we did here is we just checked the correlation of the apprenticeship skills with the skill content of the occupation an individual has 1 to 5 years after apprenticeship completion, up to 16 to 20 years after apprenticeship completion. And you can see that for all of our three skill groups, cognitive, social, and digital, these correlations stay quite high, even when we follow the workers over their careers. And you also might wonder that might be just due to the fact because they stay in their apprenticeship occupation. So this is why we conducted the same exercise, but only focusing on occupational switchers, which is panel B of this table. And here you can still see that we see positive and high correlations if we only focus on the occupational switchers. So this means that apprenticeship skills are actually transferable over individuals' careers, and that the skills that we are using are also predictive for the skills that an individual has later in life. Now let's come to the interesting part, namely merging our skill measures to outcome data. What we did is we merge our skill intensities at the 5-digit occupation level to administrative data in Germany, which is called the Sample of Integrated Labor Market Biographies, or SIAB in short. And this is actually the best data set that you can get in Germany to estimate returns to skills, since every individual that is subject to Social Security records is actually in this database. And for this project, we have access to a 2% random sample of the whole population of German workers. And these data actually span workers' labor market histories between 1975 and 2017. So we can follow the workers over 4 decades in their career. In this paper, we actually focus on full-time and male workers that we can follow for at least 15 years after labor market entry. And we follow on full-time workers because, unfortunately, these admin data only reports daily wages, not hourly wages. So if we take part-time workers, we cannot really say what they earn per hour. So to be on the safe side, we use the full-time workers. And we also use male workers because, especially in the 70s and 80s, the labor market participation of women was quite different compared to now. So there were a lot of distorting factors that might influence the returns to skills. But we have estimated gender heterogeneities in this paper from 1995 onwards. And we also see some really interesting differences here when it comes to the returns to skills. Comparing men and women. So we actually think about writing like a spin-off paper on that, just so that you have that in mind, that we do not drop female workers. And the second data source that we use is the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, or PIAC in short, which is skill assessment test data, which provides test scores and labor market outcomes for adults aged between 16 and 65. What we leverage from these data are some additional controls, because here we can observe high school grades and also an individual's family background when he or she was a kid. And we can also control for specific non-cognitive skills to control more rigorously for selection. And we link these data to outcome data at the level of the apprenticeship occupation, so at the 5-digit level. On this slide,
That's good. That's the question. In the German context, how should we think about these apprenticeships? If you have on one spectrum a vocational school in the US where you just go there for the education and there's no guarantee of any employment, or in the other end you have an internship where the purpose is to see if this person fits, like where should we think about these apprenticeships as sitting if that were a continuum?
So in the German apprenticeship context, you usually apply for doing an apprenticeship with a firm. So it's really, there's a job ad and you apply for this, and then you have an interview, and then if you get this apprenticeship, then you have your spot in the firm. And you also, so it's a dual system. You go to the vocational school and you have the training within the firm. And it's actually also quite common that apprenticeship graduates just stick with their apprenticeship firm. So in our sample, I guess it was 72% of apprentices actually stay in their apprenticeship firm after they have completed their apprenticeship.
Do you have any data on, so in a sense, they're both learning as an apprentice and then they're also engaging in production for the firm. Do you have any sense about whether for the same kind of apprenticeship plan, if there is variation in the extent to which the firm is allocating time towards the apprenticing versus production for the firm?
So we do not actually have data on how much time is spent like in producing for the firm, but usually you just learn what you need to do within the apprenticeship. So if you're at the firm and if you learn something for this firm, that counts as production. And then you also have some days that you're just at the school, which is, I guess, also regulated. So you have a certain amount of days that you're in those schools in which you usually do not produce for the firm. So
because I think even if anecdotally you can get some sense of the extent to which there's variation in that, that can help us to understand how much of the later lifetime outcomes are coming through the firm-specific human capital that they're acquiring versus like what is it that they're learning from the actual apprenticeship, or even at a fundamental level, how much variation across space there is in the way in which these apprenticeship programs might be implemented.
We also conducted some robustness checks where we do some subsample analysis for big firms versus small firms to make sure that our returns are not just driven by the fact that bigger firms also pay more and the results stay robust. So that's kind of related, but I see your point. And
that's good. That's super helpful.
So another sort of variable like that is if you're with a firm that's like a hot firm that's growing in a new area and so forth, then you're going to get all sorts of returns to things just by picking up that culture and the elements of that culture. How do you think that's a serious effect here?
So what we have already done concerning your question is this small firm, big firm, a robustness check. But I think what would also help would be to use establishment fixed effects, because then we could parcel that out.
Or just sort of turnover growth over the same time. You know, like if income went up a factor of 10, that's really different than if it didn't change at all.
That's a good point. Thank you.
And then one question from Eric, who says, can people go to a different firm than the one that sponsored them? Can they take their skills elsewhere?
And usually you complete your apprenticeship with the firm that you applied to. So if you actually quit working for this firm, you would need to go to a different firm and complete your apprenticeship there.
Start over.
I think you can actually just start at the point again where you've been before if it's the same apprenticeship occupation. So if we only switch firms conditional on staying in the same apprenticeship occupation, but it's actually a good point for us to check.
I have one other question about the sample. So this is the sample of everybody in this 2% sample of Germany, both who did apprenticeships and who didn't do apprenticeships. And then one other follow-up is, are there people who quit the apprenticeships?
So there should be some, yes. So we usually just take the ones who have completed an apprenticeship. And if someone has, for example, completed 2 apprenticeships, we only take the first one to make sure that we get these early career skills. And some people also have the concern that some people might go to university and then they do an apprenticeship afterwards. But in our specific sample, below 1% of workers have actually taken that path.
So your results are in a sense conservative.
All right, then let me continue with this really exciting empirical specification. Y is our outcome of interest. So for example, we estimate the regression with log daily wages as an outcome, but we also take different outcomes that I will come to later in my slides. And these are the outcomes of individuals who completed an apprenticeship in a specific occupation, in a specific region, and also in a specific year. And then we follow them over time. So we estimate these returns 1 to 5 years after labor market entry, 6 to 10 years, 11 to 15 years, and 16 to 20 years after labor market entry. SJ or skills, this is our apprenticeship skill measure, so the vector of skills, because we always incorporate all skill measures in our regression to actually account for correlations between the skills. We also control for some basic worker characteristics like nationality, age fixed effects, and also the pre-apprenticeship occupation, education, not occupation. And then we also incorporate apprenticeship controls. So for example, fixed effects for the district of the training company. We also control for the apprenticeship occupation at the 1-digit level to make sure that we do not compare IT specialists and carpenters, for example. And here it's important to mention that this fixed effect is at the 1-digit level, but the variation of our skill measure is at the 5-digit level. So that's also sometimes confusing. And we also use fixed effects for the years of apprenticeship completion. And last but not least, we cluster our standard errors at the level of the apprenticeship occupation.
Coming back to the previous question, did you or didn't you test individual level fixed effects?
We had individual level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tested them
Not just establishment fixed effects, that's
Okay.
still on our to-do list.
Are you testing them or separately?
So we just estimated at at the individual level, so with individual level fixed effects. Yeah.
And the apprenticeship plans vary at the firm district level, or they just vary at the kind of like the type of apprenticeship level?
Yeah, at the occupation level. So you usually have this apprenticeship plan for each apprenticeship occupation. And so, we assume that everyone in Germany has basically learned the same skills if they have done a specific apprenticeship because of these uniform examination formalities.
So you said the average firm teaches 120 skills.
Yeah, so the
And
average,
you have 165 firms,
165 plans.
plans,
plans
and
at
20,000
occupations.
skills.
Yeah.
Which argues that no plan has the same skills as any other plan.
So in our specification, we went through all of the skills again, and they have some skills that they have in common, which we label as baseline skills, and then we just take them out because they're in every plan, so it's not really informative.
But let's let Melissa finish her talk, and we can do this during Q&A or during the private session, because I know we're running short on time now.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll come back to that later.
Seems a problem.
Thanks. Okay. Yes, so the fact that we're not using any quasi-experimental variation in beta 1, so that precludes the causal interpretation of our findings, but we make sure that we always control for the most daunting confounds. This is our main results table. So for example, for cognitive skills, you can see that if someone has learned 1 additional month of cognitive skills in his or her apprenticeship, this translates to 0.8% higher wages later in life. And for social skills, we find that this association with wages that they are 1.1% higher, and for digital skills, they are 1.5% higher 16 to 20 years after labor market entry. And just to remind you of the size of these estimated coefficients, 1 additional year of schooling would translate to 7.2% higher wages. So for cognitive skills, this is 1/10 of this return. And for digital skills, it's 1/5 of the return. So that's also, these estimated coefficients are also relevant when it comes to economic, to the magnitude economically. We also checked wage growth. And here you can see that, digital skills only pay off later in life. So not in the 1 to 5 years after apprenticeship completion, also not in the 6 to 10 years after apprenticeship completion. However, workers who have learned more digital skills, their wages grow faster annually, for example, for 1.25 percentage points, 16 to 20 years after labor market entry. So they catch up on that later in life. And we will come to mechanisms in just a second. We were also interested in checking interactions of skills. So is it actually worth to, for example, learn cognitive and social skills in a specific apprenticeship to check skill complementarities? And Deming and Kahn actually find that in a high-skilled or high-wage professional context for the US. And we find the same for the low and middle wage context in Germany. So if someone has learned cognitive and social skills together, that translates to even higher wages if we estimate these interaction terms. We have conducted several further analyses, which I won't have time to get into detail today. So we wanted to account for the selection concern that I've mentioned at the beginning. We also wanted to make sure our results are robust to additional specifications. And to address the selection concern, first, we always estimate the returns to skills within these broad apprenticeship 1-digit fields to not compare completely different apprenticeships with each other. And with the PIAC data, we also account for additional potential confounds like ability, family background, and non-cognitive skills. And our results also remain robust in this specification. We were also concerned about whether there's differential selection into apprenticeships over time. So right now we estimate everything from 1975 until 2017, but we did the same splitting it at 1985, 1995 to see if we get the same results. and there's no differential selection over time in this regards. I already talked about the big versus small firm concern, so our results are also similar if we do the subsample analysis. But we should definitely go for the establishment fixed effects. We were also interested in some additional outcomes. So for example, do apprenticeship graduates actually also face better employment prospects later in life? So we estimated the same regression using years and part of full-time employment as the outcome. And our skills are also associated with better employment prospects during the career. As I already shortly mentioned, there are gender differences in the returns to social and digital skills especially. So for example, if we estimate our results starting from 1995 onwards for men and women separately, we find that social skills really pay off way more for women than for men. And digital skills actually do not pay off too much. And for men, this picture is kind of switched. So for them, digital skills really pay off. And we also think that this is really interesting to investigate further. In terms of mechanisms, we checked whether individuals go to university more often, whether they invest in on-the-job training, or whether they tend to switch occupations more often, and that this might drive some of the results. And we also estimate returns over time. So I think I have a few minutes left, so I will keep this short and sweet. In terms of educational upgrading or human capital investments, we find that workers who have done a digital intense apprenticeship, they are actually more likely to go to university later in life, which might explain why for them digital skills only pay off later in life. And what we also find when we take a look at on-the-job training, Deming and Norrie have this paper where they show for the US that actually in IT occupations, skills depreciate faster. And this is why these individuals tend to switch to other occupations more often. And what we find is, especially when workers have learned a lot of digital skills, they invest in on-the-job training more often. And we give the interpretation that this is to actually secure employability because skills are fastly changing in this field. In terms of occupational switching, we actually find that if someone has learned more social skills, they are more likely to stay in their occupation, which might be an argument for this susceptibility to technological change hypothesis, that this actually saves you from needing to switch occupations if you have learned more social skills. So this is also really interesting. We estimate the returns to skills over time. And in this graph, we follow different labor market entry cohorts. So the first cohort has entered the labor market from 1975 till 1979, and the latest 2005 until 2009. And then we run this regression separately for every labor market entry cohort and for each experience bin that they have been on the labor market to check how their returns to skills have evolved over time. And for cognitive skills and for social skills, you can see that they're always like positively associated with wages, and there's this more or less stable increase in the returns to these skills, which is most modest for cognitive, more steep for social, but the steepest for digital skills. And this gray bar up here, this is the labor market entry cohort from the 1990s until 1994. And this is actually when office computers and digitization really entered Germany. So the labor market entry cohort in the 1990s that did digitally intense apprenticeships, for them, having these skills really paid off, which is also really interesting. If we estimate the returns to skills for our male full-time prime-age worker sample by year, you can see the estimated coefficients by year here, and we can see that they also increase over time in a more or less stable pattern. And after the 1990s, the return was already most muted for cognitive skills, a little steeper for social skills, but the returns to digital skills really increased the most over time. So just to shortly conclude, in this paper, we actually derive a really reliable, objective, we think comprehensive measure of worker skills based on apprenticeship plans in Germany. And we find that these skills are highly valued on the labor market. So apprentices with higher cognitive and social skills earn higher wages in the short and in the longer run, whereas we only find this increase or this positive association with wages, the significant positive association with wages for digital skills later in life. And this is actually the first evidence that these findings that Deming and Kahn, for example, find for the US for high wage workers are also generalizable to a low and middle wage workers context. And we also document these increasing trends in the labor market returns to cognitive, social, and digital skills over 4 decades. Thanks so much for listening.
I have to kick off the Q&A with a note from Eric saying this is such an amazing piece of work, so thank you. And he says, one barrier to employers investing in skill development is that workers, and in your study apprentices, they can take their skills to another firm. And as a result, that firm only captures a fraction of its investment, and that can lead to underinvestment. And so this seems to be less of a deterrent in the firms that you study. Can you say more about how and why, and what lessons are there for US managers and policymakers from that?
I mean, so in the German apprenticeship context, as I told you, it's really common to actually stick with an apprenticeship with the apprenticeship firm. So there's really an incentive for this apprenticeship firm to invest in the development of skills for this worker, because then they have already acquired this firm-specific human capital, and if they would take this to another firm, then they would basically lose this. So I think in the US, you only have a very limited number of apprenticeships, which, if I remember correctly, are also just in a manufacturing context or in a really narrow context. So I would advise to structure this in a more broader way, to also cover more apprenticeship occupations, and to also use this dual system, which really pays off in Germany, so that you really apply for a firm and then you know that for the next 3 years you will earn a wage at this firm, and you're also tied to this firm. So this would be my recommendation. Yeah.
So the 20,000 thing was bugging me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's actually a way that skills that firms tie workers to specific firms, because that means that every firm's apprenticeship program teaches different skills.
Every apprenticeship occupation teaches different skills.
No.
But each firm.
Multiply the 165 times the 120.
Yeah.
And what you figure out is that every firm has got to have separate lists of skills.
So for each firm, there's this standardized exam. So they have to teach apprenticeship-specific skills so that they pass the standardized exam.
Okay.
So you do not.
Occupation?
For each occupation.
Okay,
yeah.
But not firm specific.
Yeah, not firm specific. So these plans are for occupations, not for firms. But the firms, they are. So these apprenticeships are standardized by the Vocational Training Act, and each firm actually corresponds to these chambers.
I wonder if one of their strategies
Yeah.
is you specialize what you teach people. They can pass the exam, but they're not really acculturated for other firms.
Okay, so you say they teach them a really specific program so that they're able to just.
So you work really well with us, but not so good over there because they teach something different.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting to look at.
Returning to Eric's question, it might be interesting to subset your analysis based on the length of the apprenticeship, because ostensibly it could be the case that for longer apprenticeships, that there's more kind of like lock.
Yeah.
Because you already have to, I know I'm going to be here for 3 years, so I invest in a house or whatever, and I kind of like really set down roots there for a really long time.
Yeah.
But if it's a 1-year apprenticeship, I'm just like, I'm in and I'm out. So I think that could be one way to test Eric's point and to see what the policy recommendations could be, because maybe the recommendation is make the apprenticeship really long if you want to have that capture.
So the mean is 3 years, so most of them take 3 years. There are only a very limited number that take longer or shorter. So I think if we would run this regression with these subsamples, these samples would be really small. Maybe we can add this as a control.
But you can power it up by just getting a larger sample, because you only have a 2% sample, right? So that's another dimension along which you can get more power. So just ask the data providers for like all the data, because all the data exists. And I think that there are people at Harvard that may have all the data.
These data providers. So usually you're only allowed to work with the 100% sample if you work at the Institute for Employment Research, IAB. So they're really restrictive that only they are allowed to use these data. And we're collaborating with them in another project to actually get access to these data. But I'm not sure if they would give it to me for also this this analysis. So usually you need to collaborate with IAB researchers to get the full sample.
I have one other quick follow-up. So that question is knowable. The second piece is, you mentioned that for the same apprenticeship occupation, the skill requirements change over time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you exploit that? Because another kind of experiment you could do is almost like a diff and diff, where you look at cohorts before and after this.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I'm working on right now. So we want to use this in some sort of staggered diff and diff, because the update, it does not take place at the same point time. Yeah, the same time. So we can do this diff and diff analysis, and we can also make a causal statement. If you compare incumbent workers, so if someone has done the old plan compared to someone who has done the new plan, and they're like 1 year apart, how does this actually pay off on the labor market? And this would also be really interesting.
Because you could have some very beautiful like cohort graphs. Because the one thing that I worried about with your results was that it seemed that these skills were not paying off in 1 to 5 years.
Yeah.
But they were paying off a lot later on in life. And so an analysis that might be constructive could be to look at, are people making different choices depending on these skills?
Yeah.
So for example, if folks are differentially getting married, like if I get more social skills, like maybe I'm like a lot more attractive on the labor market, on the marriage market, and I'm better able to get like a partner or like a richer partner, whatever the case may be. I may have more kids and so on and so forth. Because you have to ask, I think I was asking myself, well, why is it that these skills are not mattering right after you get the skills? They're mattering a lot more like 20 years post.
I mean, for cognitive and social skills, they actually pay off early in life, not just for digital skills. They pay off later in life, and this is why we've explored this educational upgrading mechanism. But also one of the next steps would be to use the previous skill measures, so from the older plans, and then always merge the correct plan to each apprenticeship graduate and see whether the results stay the same.
Direct comparison to people who don't get an apprenticeship. So like if you apply to apprenticeship and you get it, you already have this step up, and that doesn't continue to launch for the next year or two.
Yeah, I think just like being really clear about what the comparisons are. So that's why I asked the question about the selection piece, because like, are we comparing people with apprenticeships versus not, people with the skills versus not? And so I think being really sharp about what the actual treated group is and the comparison group is going to be important for thinking about which fixed effects do you put in. Do you do the diff and diff or the cross-sectional analysis? Is your comparison group people who go to university or not, or people who don't do any apprenticeship and they don't go to university?
Yeah, I mean, we only focus on apprenticeship graduates in this specific piece. So we do not because only in that way we can actually merge our skill measures to these apprenticeship occupations. We do not have any skill measures for university graduates. I think there was a question.
Yeah, along the same lines, I was thinking a lot about the selection effects that are going on here, and whether you're basically picking up traits among people who are attracted to these opportunities by firms. I have friends who've done these apprenticeships, and I want to work at BMW, and I got the apprenticeship or whatever. And then you're what the effects you're seeing are basically them getting a job there and working there for some time, and that is likely to contribute to their wages later on in life. Could that be an alternative explanation?
Yeah, so this is why we actually do these subsample analyses with like big versus small firms. Actually, these apprenticeship graduates, it's quite common that you stay in the district where you have gone to school, so they are not that mobile. If you compare it to, for example, university graduates, it's common that you move somewhere else to go to university, but you usually stick in the region where you have grown up, basically. So we can also check how often it is the case that they actually move to a different place. But for apprenticeship graduates, it's not really common that they switch all over Germany, for example.
So I wonder if you've tried young versus older firms, because there's a lot of small but old firms that might not be in these kind of more high growth sectors and more exciting areas.
That's a really good point. So we also did some robustness checks with these firm characteristics, and I remember that firm age was one of them. I do not have the results in this presentation, but I would be happy to look them up after the presentation. I have the paper with me to tell you more about what we find with these additional controls. So firm age, firm industry, and also one other additional control at the firm level.
So in this country, there's a number of universities that have started co-op programs, which are essentially apprenticeship programs. So you do university for a year, and then you spend a year with a corporation.
Yeah.
And that has, sort of a hybrid, right?
Yeah.
But the reputation it has is very good.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that's another type of thing that, of course, this might be more applicable to this country as opposed to Germany.
So, but this only applies in a university context?
The ones I'm familiar with, right, are ones that apply after you've had a year at university. And it may just be that our educational system is terrible, so you need to have this year to be able to get them to actually read and do things. And make it go on.
No, I actually was just asking this question because in Germany we also have a dual system when it comes to bachelor's and master's degrees. So you also have dual programs where you work with a firm and also study, but that's like a different program. Yeah.
Related to that, we have a question online from David Paulson who says many apprentices will want to progress in their career and become qualified as a master. Meister.
Yeah.
Could the same methodology be applied to publicly available data to show the return on investment to the Meister qualification?
Actually, I would need to check if they also have these standardized plans for Meister and Techniker, because then it would be possible, but I'm not sure about that, but I could imagine that it's also highly standardized. But that's a good point, and I will add this to my checklist after the seminar. So thanks.
Sorry if you mentioned this, but are there trends in the coefficients if you break it up into over time, looking at the certain skills, how valuable they are? Do cognitive skills become more important over time?
I think this corresponds to this graph.
Exactly.
Yeah, I just had not enough time to get into detail with these over time trends, which are really interesting. And so there's actually one paper using Swedish data by Edin et al. I think it came out in 2022, so a really recent paper. And they just compare non-cognitive and cognitive skills, and they document these increasing trends over time. And we can actually do this in way more detail with our intensive margin measure and for these 3 skill groups, and also they show this for 2 decades, we can show it for 4 decades. So there are increasing trends over time. Yeah.
Does Germany have licensed skilled trades, like an air conditioning guy? In the US, you have to get tested and certified so that you have a professional. And there are master's degrees in that, which are not educational masters, they're skilled trades masters.
Yeah, I think that would correspond to your apprenticeship certificate then. So if you have done an apprenticeship, then you have been trained in the specific occupation, and then you can call yourself
There's this big
certified.
differentiation between these things that are considered blue collar, right?
Yeah.
And white collar things in this country at least.
Yeah.
Is that the way it is in Germany?
So we have blue collar and also white collar apprenticeships. So you have these sales persons apprenticeships, you have bank clerks, and there's also a difference between the education level. So in Germany, there are 3 different ways to go to school, and there are 2 lower levels and even one way more lower level, the lower secondary education. And with these education levels, you're able to do apprenticeships like butcher or baker. And then with the medium level, you can do bank clerk and stuff. So there's also differentiation. And if you have done your A levels, then you can basically choose what you want to do as an apprenticeship. But these people usually go to university afterwards.
We're just out of time.
Then we will continue this.
So we will have to continue this conversation. Just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us, and to our audience online as well. Please do join us for October 17th. Our next seminar is fully virtual, and that's Max Tegmark. His topic is Understanding Grokking, an Effective Theory of Representation Learning. I dropped the link to register for that in the chat, so I hope all of you can join for that. Thanks again, Christina.
Thank you.